Hello and welcome to course number 81063, Voice of the Customer in Microsoft Dynamics 365 for Sales and Customer Service. My name is Derek Borman and I will be your instructor. There's a growing need to go out and be able to engage with your customers and understand specifically what their needs are. And that's really where Voice of the Customer comes in, is it gives us a mechanism to be able to engage with customers and send them survey responses and be able to really facilitate feedback back and act on that feedback. And that's really what we want to look at over the course of this particular course. So we're going to go ahead and just introduce you to Voice of the Customer. What is it? How does it work? And give you an overview of the baseline functionality that's available. What are some of the different configuration elements that are involved with it? How do you set it up and how do you trigger some of the different responses so you can go out and find stuff as part of the application? We're also going to look at survey creation and design and show you how you can create different surveys for different types of situations. Maybe you have marketing surveys that you want to go out and engage with customers based upon a marketing campaign that you've facilitated. Maybe you want to be doing more long-running surveys where maybe you're a customer service organization and you want to respond to a case that somebody has resolved, and now you want to send a survey out to them and you want to be able to really track the details of those responses, over maybe many months or even many years. And so we want to talk about the different elements that are available when you start creating individual Voice of the Customer surveys and some of the different design elements that can be used to score these particular items and give people more of an interactive feel to be able to work with options. We're also going to look at more advanced design principles as far as linking questions together. So creating kind of linking groups of questions where from a reporting perspective you can report on several different questions coming from maybe multiple surveys, or you can have questions that are related to other questions maybe as a subsector of information. We're going to talk about how you can personalize your surveys. So when you're sending your surveys out to individual respondents, how you have the capabilities to go out and pipe in personalized information. So you can address the customer by their first name. You can say, "Hello Derek, thanks for taking our survey. We just want to see how your overall experience was with whatever the name of your organization is." So really provide kind of that personalized, detailed experience. How you can act on specific responses. So again, just like anything, as somebody's going through and taking that survey, one of the answers that they give in that survey might dictate different answers in other areas of that survey that you're working with. And so how can we analyze those answers in real time and see if that should drive us down a different path and if we should work through a different area? Or maybe something that they've done inside that survey constitutes action on our part. Maybe we flag something as not being happy, and now we want to create some type of record inside the application to be able to work through that. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of those more advanced design elements that you can use when working with that survey. We're going to talk about how to distribute your surveys and how to keep track of who's taking your surveys and how to customize and personalize the links that are being sent out. You can actually distribute surveys through a variety of different methods, whether it's anonymously or whether it's actually tied to a specific individual. You can do it through iframes, you can surface it through emails, and so we're just going to look at some of the different distribution capabilities that are available with Voice of the Customer surveys, as well as some of the different response options. So as these responses are coming back and as people are, working through these surveys, what are people saying? Was the overall theme happy? Is it positive? Is it negative? Maybe we want to be able to do more advanced analytic reporting on some things. So how can we handle these different responses that are coming in? And then finally, we're going to look at some of the just different built-in reporting and analytics capabilities. Items that are associated with specific survey questions. So you can see overall responses to individual questions. Maybe you want to see overall responses to just generalized metrics for a survey as a whole. Maybe you want to see just overall survey responses and outcomes that have been dictated based upon those things. These are some of the different elements that we're going to talk about specifically as we go through the remainder of this course. So we talked about kind of in the course overview, it's really becoming more and more important that when you work with your customers, you want to engage them. You see a lot of organizations out there using tools like social engagement. They want to be able to not only see what people are saying about your organization and your brand as a whole, but they also want to be able to really respond and interact with them. So if somebody says something positive or negative, I want to be able to do something with that, and I want to be able to interact with them and act on those individual results. And that's why you're seeing a lot of organizations do do things like portals to engage with their customers because they want to give them more of a controlled environment that they can engage and access with those clients and act on that information. And that's really an area where this Dynamics 365's voice of the customer for sales and service comes into play. By giving you the opportunity to reach out to your clients proactively and collect information based upon that stuff, we now can go out and use that information for marketing. How are we going to market to our customers? What are products and services that people are interested in? Are there areas that from a service offering that we could go out and engage better or market better from that perspective? So it just provides all this information to really get more feedback and real-time input from your customers. And so in this module, what we want to look at is really just explore the needs for customer engagement and understand, why it's important in today's day and age. We also want to look at the different use cases where voice of the customer comes into play, things like marketing and service and even just customer engagement as a whole. I want to introduce you to how you set up and install the application. So we'll walk through the setup and installation procedure, and we'll talk a little bit about planning and considerations for your survey. And this is probably one of the biggest things, because one of the things that you'll see, particularly as we walk through this course, is what type of survey is it? What type of information are we trying to gather? So if we can plan that out ahead of time, that's really going to have an overlining effect on how many questions the survey has, how we handle those response definitions moving forward. And then ultimately, as you're going to deliver these surveys, you probably want to customize them. You want to add things like your company logo, or you want to add some theming to it to really tailor it to your specific needs. Or maybe you want to have different color schemes and different branding options based upon the type of survey that it is. And so this gives you the capabilities to actually go out and start working through that. So in this first module, we're going to just look at the initial setup, installation, planning, and just overall items around configuring the initial experience for voice of the customer. As I mentioned on the last slide, customer engagement through things like social media, portals, or really any other avenue is really critical to doing business today. If you're not going out and reaching out to your customers, there's a pretty good chance somebody else is. So with the voice of the customer solution, you now have an opportunity to really reach out and engage with your clients in several different capacities. And if you think about how you would do, marketing, or how you would want to engage with customers, marketing obviously would be one of the first and foremost situations. I have potential products or services that I am trying to sell to my customers. So I'm maybe going to send out a couple of surveys ahead of time before we launch all these new marketing campaigns to just gauge generalized interest on what those products and services might be. Maybe that's going to drive how we market those options, or whether we even market those options moving forward. Or maybe I just had an event or a customer type of trade show that we've hosted, and I've sent out all these different surveys to see what did people think of the speakers, how was the food, any of those number of different situations, just to understand how we might be able to do better in that perspective when we're moving forward. Or even just generalized marketing campaigns. Did we hit our target demographic? Were they happy with the print ads that we did? How was that campaign responded to on social media? What do people think to those different situations? So obviously the marketing piece of why you might use a voice of the customer solution is a very significant story, but I also like to tell the customer service story. And that's where I really see this coming in from kind of my past lifetime as a very beneficial situation, because you have a support representative who's going to go out and maybe spend 15 minutes with an individual customer, or depending upon your business model, spend a couple of hours with a specific customer troubleshooting and working through a specific problem. At the point when that problem is resolved, what is that customer thinking? And that's your best time to get that feedback. Were they overall happy with the speed of the service? How was the agent's demeanor? Did they feel like they were in touch with the right person? These are all things that we can use to gauge not only their overall satisfaction with that individual call, but also with their overall satisfaction with us as a whole. And now we can maybe start to spot areas that we're deficient in from an application standpoint. And then the other situation is for engagement situations, where maybe we want to identify specific referrals based upon past situations. So voice of the customer gives us an excellent way to be able to just reach out to customers, take that feedback that's coming back, and use that to drive our business decisions as we're moving forward. Before we dive into the setup and the installation and configuration, I want to touch on just some of the different components that make up the Voice of the Customer solution for Dynamics 365. So one of the first areas that you'll see after we get it set up is kind of your configurations area. And this is where we're going to be able to control how often we go out and look for survey responses, how many survey responses we're bringing back into the application, and just overall polling periods in regards to how that experience is looking at when we go out and try to grab those survey-based information. We're also going to talk a little bit about surveys, and obviously surveys are the cornerstone of the Voice of the Customer solution. Those are the items that are going to actually go out and interact with the people taking those options. But as those people take those surveys, those items are going to get reported back in the context of either survey responses and or feedback. And we'll talk a little bit about, as we get through this, what are the difference? Well, what's the difference between a response versus a feedback option? But as you're going through and you're setting these surveys up, we can do things like images, so we can add our custom logos, and we can modify themes, and we can do things like response routing, which will control where people go in regards to that survey based upon how they've answered previous questions. There's survey outcomes, so based upon how somebody successfully completed that survey and maybe based upon how they answered that survey, what was the outcome that was arrived? Do we need to address something with that customer? Do we need to go back, reach out to them? Should they have a lead created in the system? What is the outlining scenario? So these are all different components that obviously are going to make up the overall solution within Voice of the Customer. And then obviously from a reporting perspective, we want to be able to look back at what happened from an analytics standpoint and be able to use that information moving forward. And so each one of these different components we will touch on over the course of the remainder of this course and get through each one of them in very specific detail so you can see exactly how they fit into what we're trying to do. So one of the first things to remember with Voice of the Customer is it's not built-in functionality. It is an additional kind of what are called the preferred solutions for Dynamics 365. So you do have to go in and install it into your organization. Once you install it, it can take anywhere up to about 20 minutes or so to actually walk through the installation. And then unlike some of the solutions that you install into your organization, this one you actually have to opt into. So there's an opt-in option. So what I want to do here is just walk you through kind of the installation process and then some of the final configuration pieces that are involved with it. So we're just going to hop into our admin screen and we'll go ahead and walk through it install quick. So I'm in my Office 365 Admin Center and I'm going to go into my Dynamics 365 and I'm just going to select my instance and then I'll see Solutions. So I'll go ahead and click on Add Solution. And this will go up and load in my different solutions. And one of the options I'll see here is Voice of the Customer. So I just select Voice of the Customer and I click on Install. I'll accept the terms by clicking on Install. And this will just walk through the process. Now again, this takes anywhere between 5 to I've seen it take up to 15, 20 minutes in regards to working through it. So we'll just go ahead and let this run and then we'll show you kind of what to do once you've got it set up from that standpoint. So now that my solution's installed, I'll go back to my instances. And I'll go ahead and open up my instance. And again, the biggest thing you have to do here from a Voice of the Customer perspective is you have to opt into the functionality. Because the way that the Voice of the Customer solution works is the surveys are actually hosted externally, so they're hosted up in the cloud. And then what it does is periodically CRM or Dynamics 365 will go out and pull for survey responses and then download them in and post them into the application. And so you kind of have to opt into that service in order to facilitate that. So if I go into Settings and I go into Solutions, I'll see my Voice of the Customer solution. I'll go ahead and open that up. And it'll open right up into the configuration screen. And so this is the option that basically tells us that, this gives you your consent to share data with your external systems. And that's, in this case, totally fine. So I'll go ahead and I'll agree to the terms. I'll enable Voice of the Customer, and this will be basically what will start the processing situation for the application. So this is what will go out and kind of the configuration, but this is what's also going to go out and start trigger response processing in those items. And as we start talking about response processing in these situations, if you ever run into scenarios where for whatever reason responses are not coming back into the application, this is also where moving forward you can come in and kind of re-trigger that responding options and also look at some of the configuration elements, which we'll talk here a little bit about in the next subset of slides. There's a few different elements that make up the configuration of the voice of the customer solution. And so what I would like to do is I'll take you in and we'll show you just where a few of these different elements reside and give you kind of an overall tour of how things are laid out. But I first want to talk just about the generalized configuration. So once you enable it and you enable the processing, it's going to create a few different areas. And one of the first areas you're going to see is kind of the configurations area. And this is what will go out and define how often responses are pulled, the quantity of options that are pulled. This is what's also going to just have some of the baseline demographics in regards to what's being fetched back as part of the application. You're also going to have your configuration logs. And so this is going to show you every time that the application goes out and pulls for reports or for responses that come back. This is going to show you all of those polling options. So you'll be able to see how often it goes out and pulls for responses, how many responses are brought back as part of that polling methodology. And then if there's any functional or informational errors that are communicated back to that, this is where you would be able to see those options. And then if you have imported data or items that are coming in, this is where you get specific details in regards to the import process, in regards to what's come back from that. So what I'd like to do here is let's just hop in, we'll talk a little bit about the configuration, and then we'll give you, like I said, just the lay of the land a little bit in regards to some of the different elements that make up the voice of the customer solution. So first, if I go into settings, I can see that I now underneath settings have a voice of the customer area. And when I hover kind of over these options of the voice of the customer, I'll see voice of the customer configurations, I'll see my customer logs, and then I'll see my customer imports. So if I go into the configuration, this shows me my baseline configuration for my organization. And when I open this up, I can see that I have different elements. So this is my baseline configuration. So this is showing me if it's actively pulling for responses, if it's being paused, how many responses it's pulling back when it's pulling through that information. Also, it talks a little bit about kind of the organization path, if it's working through feedback and generating feedback, which we'll talk a little bit about. It has that information. And then it also has just some snippet templates that are associated with different elements like emailing and feedback entity templates. These are just some of the different items that constitute how things are going to get created as these response methods pull back. You're not necessarily going to spend a ton of time in here reconfiguring this information, but it's nice to understand where the baseline configuration element is inside the application. Now, also a part of this administration and setup, you'll also see the polling responses. So this is what's going to show you how often it goes out and pulls for information. So once I actually have some published surveys that are in my organization, it'll start going out and looking for responses. And inside these active survey logs, I'll be able to see the demographics behind what's taken place. Now again, I don't have any published surveys, so here as well as the import functionality, I'm not going to see any information brought in. But once we start building some surveys and we start publishing them out, we'll come back in here so you can really see how the information is being brought forth. Now that's kind of the configuration element of the application. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other options that you'll see from a solution perspective. So now that the solution's installed, if I go back to Voice of the Customer, you'll really see that I have three major elements under the Voice of the Customer option itself. I have the surveys that we're going to create, publish, design. I have the responses, the items that are coming back based upon people taking those surveys. And then I have the response outcomes. So what's been taking place based upon the responses that have come back. Those are the three main areas that you're going to see. Now, each one of these will have some different analytic options available to you based upon those options. And then you'll also see your collateral area. This is where we can do some of our co-branding and options, which we'll talk just a little bit about here in the next subset of information. One of the first things that you want to look at when you're creating your surveys is how are you going to present them? What do you want them to look like? Obviously, as your organization works, you're going to have company logos, you're going to have maybe product logos, brand images, items that you want to use to bring into your survey. So what's nice about the survey is it does support the capabilities to actually go in and upload images that can be used for survey headers as well as section logos. Now, it's a little different than your traditional CRM information in the fact that they're not actually web resources that brought in. There's actually an item inside the application application that allows you to upload those options, and then it creates kind of the item for you so you can reference that as part of the area that you're working with. Same thing with theming. So as you're going through, if you want to modify how people, the colors associated with how people are progressing through it, if you want to modify section colors, all of that information can be modified. Now it does use hexadecimal colors within that information, so as far as how you're going to modify them, you do have to know the hexadecimal color schemes. But as you're going through these, you can actually add CSS files at runtime of the server or of the survey to actually customize what that theme looks like and have that theme applied when it's moving forward. Now the nice thing about these themes is you set these different themes up and then you can apply them to individual surveys. So you could have a very specific theme for your organization based surveys, and then maybe you have different themes that you use for different products that you're sending out, maybe different themes for your unsubscribed surveys. These are all options that you have as you're kind of customizing your brand. So let's do just a little bit of baseline customization for brand customization. So I'm going to go into settings, I'm going to go into voice of the customer, and I'm going to go into images, and I'm just going to add kind of a new image. So I'm going to click on new. We'll just call this Dynamics 365. Leave the image title and the alternate text. Before I can do anything, I do have to save it. That'll then give me the ability to upload the image. So once this has gone in and saved, now this custom icon area will open up with an area where I can actually go ahead and browse out, find the file that I want to attach, and then attach the file. So we'll give this just a sec. I'll browse out, find the file I want to upload. I've got one right here. Go ahead and I'll use that and hit submit. Now it tells me that the image has been successfully uploaded. If I want to preview the result, I have to choose the image format. So I know that this is a PNG file, so I'll choose PNG, and now there's what my image is going to look like, and this will now be available for me to use throughout the context of the survey. So at this point, I can go ahead and start moving on to the next area, which would be kind of customizing my theme. But again, I could add as many of these different images and logos to my items that I want based upon what it is that I'm trying to do. So now I could go into my theming option, and here's where I could actually go through and modify or create kind of a new theme. So I could click into here and click on new. It's going to say, what do you want to call this theme? We'll just call this again sample. And now as I scroll through, it shows me the different elements. So I can see the header and the colors associated with the header. I can see my progress bar. I can see my different section colors. So these are the different elements that are going to make up items as we're going through. So now if I wanted to, I could go into any one of these individual options. I could just kind of adjust the color schemes accordingly. As I kind of tab across, it'll then start adjusting what people are seeing. So this is where you just basically modify the colors accordingly based upon how you want to work with, and this will adjust the color as you're moving forward. And then as you add images, you'll be able to see those images. So this just gives you a nice way to brand this information based upon what's going to be best from your customers. And again, you can do any number of different themes from an application standpoint. It does support multiple themes, and themes are triggered at a survey level. So before we get into actually how do you create these different survey elements and how do they work, one of the key things you always want to look at is planning your survey. Are you designing the right survey for what it is that you're trying to accomplish? And so, we always look at things like, what is it? And these are just some of the baseline questions you can think of. What's the purpose of your survey? How long should it be? Are you doing a marketing survey? Are you doing a situation where you're trying to gauge interest based upon, a specific product and or service that you're trying to deliver? Is this are these existing customers? Are these people who have submitted cases with you in your organization? If so, are you responding as a follow-up to that case? How many cases do people put out on average? So if you have a lot of customers who are constantly responding back and have a lot of case issues that are open, are they going to be getting a ton of different surveys? So you need to really think about, who is my target audience when I'm creating these? Are there ways that I can simplify delivery of the survey? And can I start off with a more simplistic survey, maybe have a couple of different qualifying questions, and then based upon how people answer those questions, can I offer subsets of questions to other people or other areas? This can really affect the likelihood on how people will actually go through and complete your surveys. Like a good example of this is we just had one for an event that we were working on that happened to be a 10-day event and had different presenters for each day. And at the end of the event, we got 10 different surveys for each one of the days. Well, after basically halfway through the second survey, I just stopped answering the questions and basically put for the remainder survey, see first survey, because my feedback was pretty much the same. And so those are things that you really want to think about is, are we going to send these out and target these information? Are we overwhelming people? Who is your audience? How many of these might they be getting? Can I take existing surveys and can I reuse some of those informations into this additional survey, or can I point people to those directions? How am I going to analyze this information? Do I want to analyze it on an individual survey situation, or do I want to be able to pull in results from multiple surveys and kind of analyze them all together and compare information from there? How are people going to be taking this survey? When I send out invites, do I want those invites to be personalized? Do I just want anonymous links to be sent out? These are all things that when you start designing these are going to affect decisions in regards to what you're doing with the solution as you're moving forward. And you'll see as we build these different solutions and these different surveys, how each one of these individual questions would really correspond with one of the baseline functionalities that would be available as you're designing your solutions. As we talked a little bit about at the beginning of this module and even at the beginning of the course, with more and more customers reaching out to their customers via social media and other channels, it's really important that you and your organization have some type of strategy for how you want to not only engage with your customers and your clients, but be able to, act on those results. And one very easy way to do that is through the Voice of the Customer solution for Dynamics 365 for sales and service. And now the big things to remember when you start moving forward is, again, it's not built-in functionality. So it is a preferred solution that you do have to install into your Dynamics 365 environment first. You also want to make sure that before you get into any of the elemental aspects of it and start designing those things, understand what your use cases are going to be. How are you going to determine how long it should be? How are you going to determine how many questions should be involved in there? How interactive? And what you want to do with those items. Those are drastically going to affect what you do from a design principle standpoint moving forward. And then when you start wanting to add some branding and some custom imaging around your surveys, you can use things like custom images and themes to really tailor your surveys not only to your brand as an organization, but even just your brand as an individual product and or service that you might be delivering as part of your survey.